Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I'm going to use this brand new Peony Celebration die from Spellbinders, and I'm going to be using it with some of this iridescent cardstock. I end up only using the plum color, which is the one in the middle, but I wanted to share with you how to create your own if you don't have access to it. Now I'm going to be using or creating window cards with nesting dies in this video, but I want to create the elements that I want to have in those windows before I get to that point. So I have a piece of regular holograph cardstock, which I think is a little bit more accessible for some people than the colored one. The colored ones are made by Tonic. I have a bunch of it in my stash, and I took some Currant and raspberry alcohol ink. I tried doing it with the alcohol ink applicator tool originally. That didn't work. So now I went in with some isopropyl alcohol and just put the alcohol ink right on that background. Now, the nice thing about alcohol inks is you can custom make colors you want. So you can do this in whatever color you want. I did find, as you can see, that it's a lot easier to spray it with the isopropyl alcohol and then lift it up and move it around. I do use the alcohol ink blower tool to help dry that. Now, this isn't going to look exactly like the holographic cardstock that I showed you at the beginning, but it's going to be similar enough, and I'll show you how it looks for what I'm using that cardstock for, that you can easily do this and create a very similar look. And then you can custom colors because alcohol inks come in so many different colors, you can customize it. Now, when you're working with alcohol inks, it's really hard to get one even layer over the entire thing. Often there are areas that are a little bit thicker than others. The thinner areas dry faster than the thicker areas. So you're going to have a little bit of variation. Now, I didn't like the Currant all on its own, so I added some raspberry to it to brighten it up. The nice thing about alcohol inks is you can keep working it over and over again. I just sprayed with some more isopropyl alcohol to rehydrate everything. And I liked the color here a lot better. It was a lot brighter. That Currant color was a little bit dark and a little bit dull, so the pink just added a nice vibrancy to it. You can do this also on plain silver mirror cardstock as well, and I'm going to show you that with some green alcohol ink in just a few minutes. And you can use these pieces for whatever you want. I like to die cut them to create different elements on a card because I really like having different finishes available when I'm creating different pieces on cards. I think it looks a lot interesting when you have some metallics and stuff like that along with your regular cardstock. Just gives a different texture. So here's just some regular silver mirror cardstock. I sprayed it with the isopropyl alcohol and then put a couple shades of green. And I'm basically doing exactly the same as what I did for that purple one. This one I'm not using. I'm only going to be using a purple. In the end, I thought I was going to be using a purple and a green, but in the end, I thought it would be a little bit too much metallic. And I really wanted to highlight the peony in that peony celebration die. So the process for working with the silver mirror cardstock is exactly the same. Now this is it after it's dried, and it actually had a little bit of a dull tone to it. And I was curious if that was maybe because of just using isopropyl alcohol and not using blender solution. So I decided to test it and use some blender solution and rehydrate those inks and just move them around a little bit and let that completely dry. And that's what did it. It no longer had that dull finish to it. I did the same thing off screen with the green piece as well. The green piece had a fair amount of shine to it, but there was a place in the center there that was fairly dull. So if you find working with just isopropyl alcohol that you get a little bit of a dull finish on your alcohol inks, try a little bit of blending solution. That might be the solution for you. So the process for this was exactly the same thing. The only thing different here is the blending solution is not in a spray bottle to spray. Because there are resins in it, it shouldn't be put in a spray bottle. It shouldn't be airborne because you don't want to breathe that in. But here it is after drying, and you can see how it doesn't look exactly the same as the holographic cardstock that I had, but I'll show you it die cut in a minute, and it still looks absolutely gorgeous for, like I said, what I'm doing with this. So I have my Peony Celebration die. And this is a gorgeous new die from Spellbinders. It has an outline as well as the detailed flower die. I'm going to be die cutting the flowers in the green cardstock, the light purple, the cardstock, and then the purple mirror cardstock as well, or not mirror, holographic cardstock as well as that alcohol ink one that I did, just to show you the difference between the alcohol ink one as well as the purple holographic one, so you can see how it looks. This die, because the outline is so thin, you don't see a lot of that color variation. And for what I'm going to do for this, I'm actually going to be cutting the leaves off because it doesn't make sense for those leaves to be that purple tone. So you're only seeing the little bit of outline for the flowers, and it's just going to add that nice metallic. It's going to be nice and colored. You could do this with just silver or gold metallic as well, and I think it would be absolutely gorgeous. I have this colored stuff, and I just wanted to use it up in a little bit of a different way. So here, the one on the left there is the alcohol ink one, and the one on the right is the one from Tonic that was already pre-done. So like I said, both of them look absolutely gorgeous. I really like the bright color in the alcohol ink one. But you can really have a lot of fun customizing it. And that way, if you don't happen to have colored metallic cardstock available to you, there's an easy way to create it. So off screen, I cut 4 of those dies with the green cardstock, 4 of them with the purple metallic cardstock, and now I'm doing the light purple cardstock. Now, before I take that die cut out of the die, I want to take a piece of press and seal, put it on the back of the die cut, and I'm just going to rub it and burnish it really well to get it to have some good contact with that die cut. Then I'm going to remove that die cut out of the die. Now, for this particular color, all I want is those inside petal pieces. That's why I'm keeping it within the die, so then I know exactly where each one of those petals go. It's going to make it so much easier when I go to put this piece together to have them in place and know exactly where they're going to go. I'm also going to be doing some ink blending on this piece, and it's going to be much easier to ink blend when that is on that press and seal and staying in one spot. I want to give a little bit of shading to the greenery for the leaves, so I have some peeled pink distress ink and an ink blending brush, and I'm just using that on from the center of the flower out, just basically ink blending the bases of the leaves. And then I have some Seedless Preserves distress ink here, and what I'm going to do is I have a detailed ink blending brush, and I'm just ink blending from the bottom of the petal or the base of the petal out. I'm not doing the entire petal. I want to have a darker area towards the center of the petal and a lighter area towards the outside of the petal. And this is going to look like a hot mess until I start picking these pieces out and paper piecing them into my other die kit. Now, one thing to note, I didn't put any adhesive sheets on any of these die cuts because I was creating so many of them. I knew I'd be going through a whole lot of adhesive sheets, but when it comes time to put things together, that would make the job a lot easier. So just a heads up, if you wanted to create with this and you wanted to try this, that is an excellent solution. And then you would have adhesive on the backs of these already, so you wouldn't have to be worried about putting any glue or adhesive on there. Again, I have 4 of each one of the die cuts, so that's 12 die cuts. So I'd end up using a whole bunch of adhesive sheets. And A, I didn't want to, and B, I didn't really think about it until afterwards. It's one of those things that I had thought about ahead of time, and then while I was creating them, I just didn't. But that is the solution. If you don't like how I'm going to be gluing them together, you think it's a little bit finicky, the solution is adhesive sheets, and then you're just basically peeling the backing off and inserting the piece, and it does make the assembly process a lot quicker. So you can see how this ink blending looks weird, but it's going to make so much more sense in a minute. So for the shadow part for each one of these dies, I just cut out a vellum shadow. You could do white cardstock here as well. I wanted it to be a little bit transparent. And then I have my Barely Art glue in a nice fine tip bottle, and I'm just putting it over the back of the green die cut first. Now I do this with the green die cut first, and then I do the dark purple metallic one, and then I start inlaying the petals. For my second one, I changed up the order a little bit, and it just makes it a little bit more sense. So I'll show you that as well. But for the first one here, I've got my glue on the leaf, putting it on the vellum. Now I'm using only a little bit of glue here. I know vellum does not like liquid glues. I'm putting an acrylic block on there to hold everything in place, hold everything nice and flat. But like I said, I only used a tiny little bit of glue there, so it's not sopping wet with glue. For the next layer with the purple metallic, I'm going to take some scissors and I'm going to cut off all of those excess leaves. The little branch there with the buds, I have that cut off, but I am going to cut off those buds and glue them onto the green to add that detail to it. When I'm cutting them off, I'm trying to keep that purple line very similar to the size of the line in the rest of the die cuts. You can see that it's not exactly even all the way around, so there's a room for some variance there, but I'm trying to keep it very similar so it's not super visible that pieces were cut off. So I'm going around the lines of the different petals where they were, and unless you knew it was there and you can see the difference where it was cut versus where it was die cut, it's very hard to see. So I'm going to put that same Barely Art glue with that fine tip bottle over the back there. And then I'm just putting that purple outline right on top of the green one that I already have there. So this part is very easy. You don't have to worry about positioning anything other than making sure that purple is right on top of that green. And then I put that acrylic block right back on top of there. For the buds, I highly recommend a pair of tweezers to hold them, to put the glue on, in order to place it right on the buds there. That's the hardest part really of this whole thing, is holding on to those little tiny buds. Now, I am not worried about, I think some of these buds have kind of leaves at the base of them. I'm only cutting them off at the stem and then putting them onto the green part that way. If you wanted to, you could cut along some of the lines that are in that die cut and create leaves at the base of each one of the buds. I kind of thought that detail was so minimal that it wasn't really necessary to do that, but that is an option if you want to do it. I like the way it ended up turning out like this. I like that extra pop of purple on there. Now that we have the purple metallic, we can start gluing in those petals. So I'm using that same Barely Art glue with the fine tip bottle, and I put glue in. At this point, I just did 3 spaces. For the next one, I think I do about 5 different spaces. So you don't want to put glue in all of those pieces because it's going to start drying out before you get to that point. So I just put glue in 3 different spaces, put those petals into those spaces, and it's really like doing a puzzle. You know exactly where that piece is going to go. It pops right in there and you press it right down. Now, because my dark purple layer is 2 layers thick, because that dark purple is on top of the green, and my ink blended piece of the petals that I'm putting in here is only 1 layer, I'm not putting my acrylic block on there to hold it down because it's really not going to hold anything down. This is why I changed up the layers or the order for the second one. For the second one, I put the green piece down, put my ink blended petals down, and then hold it down while I'm working on it. And then I put that dark purple metallic piece on there. And I do that for the rest of the flowers. In the end, you can't tell which flower was done which way. I just found it much easier to have the acrylic block holding those pieces down, making sure they're nice and flat while I work on putting in the next pieces. And you can see, even without having some adhesive sheets on the back here, this goes really rather quickly, putting all these pieces together. And you can see how it's a much bigger help having the light purple ink blended pieces on that press and seal still within the die. It makes it very easy to know exactly which piece goes where. Just take it out of one, pop it right into the other. And that press and seal, the adhesive is kind of like a Post-it note. So it's enough to hold it on, but it's really easy to pull it off to put it into the next part of the die cut. So it's a perfect way to hold those pieces in place while doing that ink blending, as well as to just easily grab those pieces and inlay them into your die cut. Now I know that I'm going to create 2 different cards here with 2 different windows, and I'm using 2 of each one of these die cut flowers for each one. So I'm creating 4 of these pieces. I'm going to do this first and then the second one where I alter the order on screen. The other ones I'm doing off screen. But you can see how they do come together. A lot of this is just basically the prep. That takes up the most time, is doing the die cutting, the ink blending, and whatnot. But once we get to the point where we're putting things together, it really comes together rather quickly, thanks to that prep ahead of time. So even though that ink blended peony looked a little bit odd on the actual cardstock, I really love how it looks when you put it into the finished piece, and you can see that metallic purple outline. I love that hint of metallic, the little different texture that you get from it, as well as the green leaves here. So for the second one, I do have it sped up, so it's a lot quicker. So I put my glue in about 5 different areas. At this point, I only have that green onto that vellum base, and then I put 5 different petals in, move my acrylic block just to hold that down in place and flat, and then work on a different area. After that, I go and take that purple die cut, get all of those leaves off of it, glue it right on top, and once again, it's just a matter of matching the purple outline to the green outline. Here's the 2 finished ones. They look exactly the same, so it just is a personal preference as to which way you would like to do this. So for my mirrors, or for my windows, I have got the Essential Arches die as well as the Mirrored Arch Labels die. So these are die sets that have a lot of different nested shapes within that same die set. I'm not using the biggest one from each one of the sets. I'm using the 4 different sizes below that. So of those 4 sizes, the biggest and the smallest are going to be die cut out of green. The second biggest and second smallest are going to be die cut out of that same purple mirror cardstock. Or if you decide to do some alcohol ink cardstock, I would die cut it out of there. It's just to give a nice fine accent to the windows, or to the frame that we're going to create with these dies. These pieces here are different pieces from what I die cut for the flowers, because those flowers were just a little bit too big. I couldn't use that same piece of cardstock. However, once these are die cut, these purple mirror pieces are going to go into my specialty paper scraps. They will be used for other things, so none of it is going to go to waste. It would have been great if the Peony Celebration die fit well within here and I didn't have to use extra pieces, but sometimes that happens. So it is going to be used. None of this is going to go to waste, but they are separate pieces. So now that I have everything taped in place, and you definitely want to tape them in place, especially those tiny bits or tiny dies on the mirrored cardstock or the specialty cardstock. By taping them in place, you can make sure that those frames are nice and even all the way around. And I'm going to do the same for both the mirrored arches as well as the Essential Arches dies. Die cut them and then set them aside, and then we will glue them together. Now, because I'm cutting 2 different pieces at once, and especially this Essential Arches, there's a nice long area. It does take a little bit more for the die cutting machine to go through it. If you wanted to make it easier on your machine, I would die cut each one of them separately and put your piece of cardstock at an angle on your cutting base. That way it's not going to have a straight, sharp edge to go over at once. Once all of those pieces are out, we can take all of that tape off. These are pieces of yellow tape, and I will reuse them until they don't stick anymore. So once again, we're not doing a whole lot of waste here. But what I do want to do is the smallest of the dies that we're using is I want to take that, have my card base closed, tape that in place so I know it's exactly where I want it to go, and then I'm going to open it up and I'm going to put it through my die cutting machine to cut that window out of the front of the card. Now you could do one of the little bit bigger ones if you wanted. However, I wanted to do the smallest one because I wanted there to be an area for gluing that window in place, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to see the back of some of those pieces there. So that's why I'm using the smallest ones of the nesting dies that I've used for this. So I'm going to do the same thing with the Essential Arches dies. I'm using the smallest one here, taping it in place to make sure it's exactly where I want it to be, and then I'm putting it through my die cutting machine with that card base open so that I know that I'm not going to be cutting through the front and the back of the card. So this is a great way to just create a bit of a different card base by having that window out there. It just gives it just a little bit of a different look from something more traditional. Now we're not quite done with our dies yet. The second biggest die that we used, I'm going to use that one, and I'm going to cut a piece of acetate to go in our window. You could also use the largest one, but by doing the second largest one, it gives you a little bit of wiggle room when you're going to glue that acetate onto your frame for the front of your card. But if you wanted to use the biggest one, it's just going to match that exactly. I wanted to give myself a little bit of wiggle room, but it's really personal preference what you want to do. So I just have a piece of acetate here. I'm cutting a piece big enough for each one of those windows. And this acetate die cuts beautifully. I just run it through my machine with that die, and then I'm going to put that piece aside. So this acetate here is just going to give me something to glue those flower die cuts on that we have already created and have waiting. You could try to create this window without that and just have the die cuts bumping up to each other and glued to each other. I really like the look of the window, or with the look of the acetate, that little bit of shine it creates, and it also makes it just a little bit easier to place those die cuts, having something for it to glue onto. With these little windows done, I'm going to glue my purple specialty paper to the green window. Because these pieces are fairly thin, you'll notice that the specialty paper likes to curl. So a little bit of glue on the back of each one, and then I move things around as I'm placing it. If by chance you get any of that liquid glue on the front of that specialty paper, just wipe it off while it's still wet. It comes off really, really easily. A little bit harder to get it off once it's dried, but you can typically see it while it's still wet. Really easy just to rub that off and get the shine back to your specialty cardstock. I'm doing the same thing for those mirrored arches. Once again, much easier to do this with liquid glue and make sure that everything is in place, and then put that acrylic block on top of there to hold that down while it dries. For my flower die cuts, I'm just gluing them on with a little bit of liquid glue on the back of that vellum before gluing them to the piece of acetate. If you wanted, you could also die cut a piece of, say, white cardstock and put that on the inside of your acetate to hide this little bit of glue. There's not a ton of glue though, so I am leaving it alone. If that bothers you, you can absolutely put some glue on there, a cardstock on the back of it to hide it in place. But I kind of liked the look of the vellum with the die cut, so I didn't really want to mess with that. Now I'm just paying attention to how these are placed onto the acetate. I'm trying to cover up as much area and use as much of these die cuts as possible. So I'm gluing them down, putting my acrylic block on there to let it completely dry before trimming them. And then those pieces that I trim off, I'm going to use those pieces to fill in some of the other open areas. Now I have my die cut so that the vellum pieces are touching. I wanted to see as much of that die cut as possible because we've spent so much time on it, and I really like how they look. I don't want to use them sparingly. I want to be able to see them. But if you only wanted to use one die cut on here, that would be gorgeous and it would absolutely work as well. I wanted it to look a little bit kind of like a cross between like a tapestry and a stained glass window. So I wanted to see a good amount of those die cuts. My surface here is the Tim Holtz Media Surface Mat. So any of that glue that's not on my die cut on top of the vellum is just on the surface mat, and it's not going to ruin it. It's going to dry perfectly where it is, and I'm still going to be able to pick it right off in order to cut the excess of that die cut off. So it's a great surface to work on, especially for something like this. Also perfect for when you're doing different ink blending and whatnot, because it cleans off really, really easily. You can see that it does get stained after a while and you get little scratches or whatnot in it. But it's a great surface to be working on. So I'm doing the second window here, just filling in some of those open areas with some of those die cuts. You can see how I'll sometimes glue pieces in place and then cut off pieces from those that aren't being used and use those to glue in the other areas where I want pieces filled in. And it's really easy to take those frames, place them over top, just to pay attention to what parts you're actually able to see on this and whatnot. So once that is dry, I can glue those excess pieces off of there. At this point, those excess pieces, I highly doubt I'll use them for anything. I tucked them to the side, but most of them are fairly used up and they're just kind of random pieces of middles of flowers or leaves. So I don't think they have a whole lot of use to them. So now that my windows are done, I can take my frames and I can glue them right to those windows. Now I'm putting the glue on the inside of the frame because my piece for the acetate was slightly smaller than the outside of the frame. Now I end up putting this first one a little bit too high, and when it's all dried and I pick it up, I notice that I have a little bit of the die cuts peeking out underneath. Easy enough to trim off, but to do it again, I'd pay a little bit more attention and make sure that I didn't have that excess there. It's one of those things I didn't notice until I had my white card base behind it. But this is where it's nice to have that little bit of wiggle room when it comes to your die cuts. So now we can put the glue onto the front of our card. Because this is all ready to go, I'm putting the glue right close towards the window opening, and then I'm putting another layer of glue on my die cut around the outside edge. When I place my die cut down, I'm trying to match up the inside of the window frame with the inside of the window opening on the card front. It's a little bit hard to line up because I have those die cuts around that whole edge. There's a few areas where it's still exposed, so I just used those as a guide in order to figure out exactly where those pieces were. I'm doing the same thing to the second one here, putting those acrylic blocks on there to hold that down in place while that dries. I have some thanks dies that I created off screen just with some scrap white cardstock, and then I did the thanks part of it with some of that excess purple metallic that I had left over from die cutting the flowers. So there was a border on the edge that was perfect for die cutting the thanks out of there. I'm just going to take that same liquid glue, put it on the die cut, and then put them on my windows. Once again, putting that acrylic block on there to hold it in place. You can see I took my bone folder and reinforced the fold in here because that cardstock is fairly thick. I wanted to make sure that I had a nice fold in there and it was not popping open too much. With that thanks done, I can put that acrylic block on there and let that dry. Now, if I were to just leave these like this and you were to write on the inside of the card, you'd be able to see that through that window. So I created a top folding card a little bit smaller than my 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card base. So this one is 4 inches by 5 1/4. So that it's just a little bit inside, but this gives you a spot to write on the inside of your card, and you don't have to worry about seeing it through the front window of your card. Let that completely dry, and then we have our finished card bases. I absolutely love how these turned out. I love that little bit of metallic that you get from the outline of those flowers, and you could see on the inside of that card that you can see the back side of the vellum. If you look really closely, you can see a little bit of the glue. Once again, I don't mind that, but if that bothers you, you can easily put some white die cuts in there. I wanted to avoid that simply because I didn't want it to be too thick for that front window, but it is an option if that is something that you want to do. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you being here. Have a fantastic day.